Chakshurunmilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam yena bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tati Swapatantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapad Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sarvahutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vikamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kancana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So just 1 second again, I'm just going to lower this light a little bit. Okay. Hare Krishna. So we are studying chapter 5, and we are on verse number 7, chapter 5. So this is, let me get it on my computer here. Okay. Action, Karma Yoga, action in Krishna consciousness. And last week we did the first section of chapter 5, which is Nishkam Karma Yoga is easier than renouncing work, or Karma Yoga or Buddha Yoga or Krishna consciousness. It's a lot easier than taking sannyas and going off into the forest and trying to practice Sankhya or Jnana Yoga. So now this section from 7 to 12 talks about how to perform this Nishkam Karma Yoga, which leads to Bhakti Yoga. Yoga yukto vishuddhatma vijitatma jitendriyaha sarva bhutatma korvan api nalipyate. One who works in devotion. So this is how to perform it. Ultimately, realization of the super soul. One who works in devotion, who is a pure soul, and who controls his mind and senses, is dear to everyone, and everyone is dear to him. Though always working, such a man is never entangled. And Prabhupada writes that one who is, this is right at the beginning of the purport, one who is on the path of liberation by Krishna consciousness is very dear to every living being. And every living being is dear to him. This is due to his Krishna consciousness. Such a person cannot think of any living being as separate from Krishna, just as the leaves and branches of a tree are not separate from the tree. He knows very well that by pouring water on the root of the tree, the water will be distributed to all the leaves and branches. Or by supplying food to the stomach, the energy is automatically distributed throughout the body. Because one who works in Krishna consciousness is a servant to all, he is very dear to everyone. And because everyone is satisfied by his work, he is pure in consciousness. Because he is pure in consciousness, his mind is completely controlled. And because his mind is controlled, his senses are also controlled. Because his mind is always fixed on Krishna, there is no chance of his being deviated from Krishna. Nor is there a chance that he will engage his senses in matters other than the service of the Lord. He does not like to hear anything except topics related to Krishna. He does not like to eat anything which is not offered to Krishna. And he does not wish to go anywhere. Krishna is not involved. Therefore, his senses are controlled. So, such a person cannot think of any living being as separate from Krishna. So, I don't know how successful I've been, but I've been trying to practice that. Right now I'm in New York City. And one of my favorite things to do is just walk around New York City. And it's such a interesting place in a lot of ways. And, usually with earphones on and listening to some katha. And, for the past almost 3 years, I haven't been with anyone, and I've been on Zoom with everybody. And so it's very interesting to be in a city which has so many people. Now, of course, you are also in a city that has so many people. But in the US, like even I live in Washington, DC, not that many people, especially on the streets, very, very few people on the streets. And where our temple is, it's 12 acres of land far away from other people. So don't see anyone except, when they come to the temple. So to try to practice what is said here in the purport, it's been a good sadhana to try to go out and you see all these people and attractive people, ugly people, old people, young people, people with children, this and that, all over the place. And to remember that all of them are part and parcel of Krishna. And then Prabhupada gives us some very high standards in this last, second to last sentence that I read. He does not like to hear anything except topics relating to Krishna. And that doesn't mean gossip about devotees or the latest ISKCON conflict, but it means about Krishna. He does not like to eat anything which is not offered to Krishna. So that should be our standard. We only take prasadam. Now, you might not be at a temple where you can always have prasadam. You may not always be at home when you can offer to your deities. But even if you're out or at a business meeting and having a luncheon, you can still in your mind offer everything to Krishna. So only take prasadam. And does not wish to go anywhere if Krishna is not involved. So that is a high level of Krishna consciousness that Prabhupada is requesting us to perform. So the next two verses describe Krishna. Krishna describes the Jitendriya, the renounced, self-controlled person, and how that person goes about their duties. A person in the divine consciousness, although engaged in seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving about, sleeping, and breathing, always knows within himself that he actually does nothing at all. Because while speaking, evacuating, receiving, or opening or closing his eyes, he always knows that only the material senses are engaged with their objects, and he, the soul, is aloof from them. And just in the purport, just one sentence, the Krishna conscious person is always free, even though he appears to be engaged in affairs of the senses. So Krishna is describing here how transcendental knowledge, which was the focus of the last chapter, that knowledge that we are not our bodies how it should be expressed through action, through work, through doing something in this world. How can you understand you're not your body and at the same time your body's doing all these things? So that's what is being explained here. And this knowledge allows us, if we can really fix it in our consciousness, it allows us to remain aloof from the body as we are doing our work. We see that our body is acting, but we have no interest in enjoying the fruits of our actions. We're just fixed in service. So how, does the work of such, does that kind of work, a person who does it in this consciousness, do they get any karma? Do they get any, pop, any sins? I'm sorry, I forgot to read the Sanskrit for the last 8 and 9. It's Naiva kinchit karo miti yukto manyate tatvavit. Pasyan shridman sprisan jugran ashnad anan gachan swapan swasam. Pralapan visrijan grinan unmishan nimishan api indriya nindri yarteshu vartante iti darayan. And now today, the next verse, verse 10, Brahman yadhaya karmani sangat vaktva karotiya lipyate na sapapena padma patram ivam basa. One who performs his duty without attachment, surrendering the results to the Supreme Lord, is unaffected by sinful actions. No karma, no sinful action. As a lotus leaf is untouched by water. And at the end of the purport, Prabhupada writes that the conclusion is that a person without Krishna consciousness acts according to the concept of the material body and senses. So that's for the non-devotee. But a person in Krishna consciousness acts according to the knowledge that the body is the property of Krishna and should therefore be engaged in the service of Krishna. Right. So that is quite a consciousness that this body, this mind, this intelligence is Krishna's. We have a t-shirt, property of Krishna. And therefore we engage it in Krishna's service. So this verse is telling us we should be situated in knowledge, and then we should do our duty in a detached way. And by doing that, we'll perceive that as our body is doing things, we'll think, I do nothing, I am a soul, I am aloof. And then when we connect that with Krishna and surrender our results to him, then all of our activities are like the lotus leaf untouched by water. There's no karma, no sins for this. So, if you ever seen like a lotus, the leaf has like a very waxy surface and water just slides off of it. So reactions to work just glide off when we perform activities in this way. So I'll read 2 more verses and then I'll take questions or comments. Text 11. Kayena manasa buddhya kevalaya indriyarapi yogina karma kurvanti sangam tvak patma sushud haye. The yogis, abandoning attachment, act with body, mind, intelligence, and even with the senses. Why do they do it? For the purpose of purification. So in the purport, Prabhupada writes at the beginning, when one acts in Krishna consciousness for the satisfaction of the senses of Krishna, which is just what we talked about, any action, whether of the body, mind, intelligence, or even the senses, is purified of material contamination. And then the last sentence is, when he applies everything produced of the body, mind, intelligence, words, life, wealth, etc., whatever he may have within his possession, to Krishna's service, he is at once dovetailed with Krishna. He is one with Krishna and is devoid of the false ego that leads one to believe that he is the body, etc. This is the perfect stage of Krishna consciousness. So that verse answers the question, if someone is detached from work because he knows he's spirit soul, why does he work? And Krishna says, for the purpose of purification. So one more verse, and then we'll see if you have questions, comments. So now Krishna is going to compare the attached with the unattached in verse 12. Yukta karma phalam tvaktva shantim apnoti naishtikim ayukta kama karena phale shakto vibhadyate. The steadily devoted soul attains unadulterated peace because he offers the results of all activities to me. Whereas a person who is not in union with the divine, who is greedy for the fruits of his labor, comes entangled. So there's the contrast. Steadily devoted, gets peace, offers all of his activities to Krishna. One who's not a devotee is greedy and becomes entangled. Purport. The difference between a person in Krishna consciousness and a person in bodily consciousness is that the former is attached to Krishna, whereas the latter is attached to the results of his activities. A person who is attached to Krishna and works for him only is certainly a liberated person, and he has no anxiety over the results of his work. That doesn't mean we don't have any anxieties. You know, we are anxious about our Krishna consciousness, especially, and maybe the health of a loved one or this, that, but we're not, attached to the results. We see that Krishna's in charge of my life, and we, hey Govinda. In the Bhagavatam, the cause of anxiety, so here's the cause in the Bhagavatam, or the results of an activity is explained as being one's functioning in the conception of duality. That is without the knowledge of absolute truth. So instead of, we're seeing, duality means we're seeing good and bad instead of Krishna's hand, right? Does that make sense? In Krishna consciousness, there is no duality because there's just Krishna's mercy. All that exists. That doesn't mean that we merge, we're not talking about Advaita Vedanta here, that we merge with God, but the duality is seeing things separate from Krishna. All that exists is the product of Krishna's energy, and Krishna is all good. Now, if we understood that sentence, we'd go back to Godhead. All that exists is a product of Krishna's energy, and Krishna is all good. Therefore, activities in Krishna consciousness are on the absolute plane. They are transcendental and have no material effect. One is therefore filled with peace in Krishna consciousness. But one who is entangled in profit calculation, all about myself, then it just becomes hellish, right? But when one is entangled in profit calculation for sense gratification, they cannot have that peace. This is the secret of Krishna consciousness. Realization that there is no existence beside Krishna is the platform of peace and fearlessness. So, no anxieties if we leave everything up to Krishna. And that is difficult, but possible. I was with a devotee. He just passed away on Guru Purnima. He's only 40 years old, has 2 young daughters, but he got cancer. And he was fixed. He was really fixed. And maybe I talked about him last week. I can't remember. He was so in good consciousness. He told me, I have no attraction anymore at all for YouTube or Netflix or this or that. I only want to hear about Krishna and chant Krishna's name. His guru, Radhanath Swami, came to visit him. The famous singer, Janavi Harrison, she spent a day there singing to him. And other devotees were reading and things like that. He was very, 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 very fortunate. And he just passed away 2 days ago. And he didn't even have that much pain. Some was there. But so this is, he got beyond why is this happening to me? I'm only 40 years old. What's going to happen to my daughters, etc. He got beyond that to see, as we just read in this purport, that Krishna is all good, and that he just needed to fix himself on Krishna at the end of his life. And it's true that Krishna will take care of his family and etc. So we covered 6 verses there. So any questions, comments on any of them? It's all good?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Yes.
Yes, Madhurapati. So here it is mentioned, but one who is entangled in profit calculation for sense gratification cannot have the peace. At the same time, devotees also have some calculation in devotional service. So
They have somewhat, what was that word? Somewhat in devotional service?
devotees also have some calculation in devotional service.
Cancellation?
Calculation, Prabhu.
Calculation.
Devotees also have some calculation in devotional service.
Right.
So how do they purify themselves?
The difference is that they do, hopefully they're doing it for Krishna's pleasure. So that's their focus is this pleasing to my guru? Is this pleasing to Krishna? So they can even have a competition with another devotee, Prabhupada, like transcendental competition, but it was all for Krishna's pleasure. It wasn't so that they could become big, people. One time Prabhupada said that he was joking with them, and he said, if one devotee beats another devotee on book distribution, the other one will have a heart attack. So he's encouraging us to do more and more service for Krishna's pleasure. But you at the same time, your question is a good one, because we have to be on guard. We have to be careful, because sometimes we may do devotional service, but really want people to praise us, right, or to thank us. And the more advanced idea, and this is not easy to attain, but the more advanced idea is that Trinadapi Sunichena Tarodapi. I don't want any recognition. I just want service. Bas. Katam. Finished. And if anyone recognizes it, no problem. If nobody recognizes it, no problem. My shelter and my identity doesn't come from other people recognizing me. It comes from me trying to please Guru and Krishna. And then when we're like that, we feel their reciprocation in our heart, even if everyone walks right past us and says, Mathurapati, who's he? I don't know him very well. I think he's a doctor, this, that, but or whatever. It just says MD at your name, but that's maybe another name after Mathurapati, right?
Madhurapati Madhusudan.
Yes, so it's not doctor. But or somebody may say, Mathurapati, he is such a great devotee. He's so good. Make sure we give him Mahaprasadam every time he comes to the temple. And so either one, we shouldn't be fazed. We shouldn't hanker for that or be upset with that. And I know for myself, it's a challenge. Sometimes if I give like what I think is a good class, I'll be upset if nobody comes up to me afterwards and said, "Oh, Prabhuji, very nice class." I almost expect it. So I have to control my mind and not think like that. Just like, okay, class is over. Thank you so much, my dear Guru, my dear Krishna, for allowing me to do some seva. And in Vrindavan, at the end of, I don't know if they still do it or not, but they used to give everyone Mahaprasad. They used to speaker Mahaprasadam after the class. So if they didn't get, I said, where's my Mahaprasad? Is that all right, Prabhu?
Yeah, Prabhu. Thank you, Prabhu.
Sure. Anything else? Okay, then we can go on. I know that Navadvip Sachi Mataji is not here
In the
this week.
chat box, there is some question, Prabhu.
Acha, in the chat?
Chat box, Prabhu. So,
Okay. Does Krishna take care of devotees according to the karma, or is there special mercy in case of the devotee who went back to Godhead, who had two small daughters? Does Krishna take care of devotees according to the karma, or is there special mercy? Well, Krishna often uses our karma to purify us, but you know, those two daughters, as much as we say, oh, they're two young daughters and all that, on another level, they are spirit souls and they have their own karma, right? And they have their own, not only karma, but they have their own relationship with Krishna. Yes? So there may be, who knows, you know, it's very hard to understand what goes on in this world. And we say Krishna is merciful, but what is that mercy? It's not necessarily that you make a lot of money or that your family life is nice. It's that Krishna, you develop love for Krishna. And we do remember, now I know we're talking about a devotee here, but let's just talk in general. We really need to make sure that our expectations are very clear, or that Krishna, we remember what Krishna says. He says, Dukalayam. He's Dukalayam asashvitam. He says, Anityam asukam loka. I think you all know what those are, easy Sanskrit words, right? Dukalaya, it's a place of unhappiness. Asukam means no happiness. So it's a rough place. Prabhupada had 2 heart attacks on the way to America, right? Yeah. What is it? Sankara only lived 32 years, I think it was. You know, so, you know, everyone has to die one time or another. So why did it happen for this devotee? Well, the clearer point about Krishna's mercy is that he got so much association and devotees were leading kirtan, and he led a very nice devotional life. He was only a devotee about 8 years, but he disappeared. He left this world nicely, and Krishna, you know, will take care. In the 13th chapter of the first canto of the Bhagavatam, there is an important instructions there. In the beginning of the chapter, Vidura has visited the Hastinapur, and he sees that Dhritarashtra is like a household dog eating the scraps of food left by Bhima. In other words, he tried to kill the Pandavas and now he's living at their mercy. So Vidura is saying, it's not the Pandavas that are maintaining you. It's Krishna. He's the only maintainer. So you should take shelter of him. And then at the end of the chapter, when Gandhari and Dhritarashtra, they actually leave home, right? Without telling anybody. They just follow Vidura and they go to the Himalayas. So then Yudhisthira is looking out all over for them, because every morning he would come there to Gandhari and to Dhritarashtra and touch their feet and bow down before them and make sure they were taken care of. And they were gone. And he was lamenting, oh, what did I do? What did I do? So then Narada Muni appears and he says, so the illusion in the beginning of the chapter was to think that someone other than Krishna is maintaining us. And the illusion at the end of the chapter is to think that I am the maintained. It's by my mercy that Yudhishthira is thinking, by my mercy, Gandhari and Dhritarashtra are being maintained. And Narada Muni said, no, 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 no. He says, one who's in the jaws of the serpent of death, how can they free someone else from those jaws? So the point is that Krishna, will take care of these daughters. And of course, even they've already been arrangements to take care of them from a practical point of view. But we do have our karma coming into this world, and our karma, it goes away gradually by the process of Krishna consciousness. We say gradually because Prabhupada says when you unplug the fan, it still goes around for some time, right? Everyone has that experience. And in Vrindavan, the electricity would go out all the time when I was living there. And so you'd see the fans would slowly keep going around for a while. Right? But Krishna often uses our karma to teach us lessons and bring us closer to him. So I hope that's helpful to Sadhanand Keshav Prabhu or Navina Gopika Mataji.
Yes, Prabhu.
Thank you, Mataji. Pranav Prabhu, can you please explain how purification happens by doing work? Yes. If we do it in the right consciousness. Now, if you're just doing it like, I can't wait till the day is over and then I'm going to go to the restaurant or to the hotel and have some drinks and, then turn on the television all night long. That kind of work does not purify anybody. But if we act understanding I'm not my body and my activities are dedicated to Krishna and we're still working in this world, then that work is definitely purifying. I hope that helps. And then one person sent me a direct message. Oh no, they were just talking about the something, not a question. Okay, so shall we go on to verse 13? So in 13 to 16, now you got to really sharpen your philosophical ears and mind right now, because this is a little philosophical. But let's do it. Text 13. Sarva karmani manasa sanyasyaste sukham vasi navadvare pure dehi naiva kurvan nakarayan. When the embodied living being controls his nature and mentally renounces all actions, he resides happily in the city of 9 gates, neither working nor causing work to be done. Okay. I just want to send myself a reminder. I just remembered something I got to get done. Just give me a second. Krishna, Krishna. Okay. When the embodied living being controls his nature, so we have to control our nature and renounce all action, he resides happily in the city of the 9 gates, which is the body, right? 2 eyes, 2 ears, except nine gates, neither working nor causing work to be done. So these next 4 verses, they answer a question that Krishna already discussed to some extent in chapter 3 and chapter 4. Namely, who is the doer? And there's 3 choices. The living entity, us, the soul, material nature, the 3 modes of material nature, or Krishna as the Param Atma. So this verse describes ours, the jiva's role, right? That we have to control our nature, renounce actions, resides happily in the city of the 9 gates. And by the way, it's an easy way to think about this that avoids Mayavadi ideas. No one thinks because I live in a city, I am the city, right? Right? It's kind of ridiculous, isn't it? Like if I said, I am New York City. Well, there's a lot of crazy people in New York City, and they would just add one more crazy person to the list, namely me. Right? Because I am not New York City, even though I'm in New York City. Right? So I'm in the city of the 9 gates, the soul is in there, but I'm not the city of 9 gates. Okay, so that means that's showing that we have some role in the doership. Now, to have this consciousness of renouncing all actions and controlling one's nature, one asks, what results do we achieve when we get that consciousness? And that's the next verse. Na kartritvam na karmani lokasya srijate prabhu na karma phala samyogam swabhavas tu pravartate. The embodied spirit, master of the city of his body. Now listen to this. Does not create activities, does not induce people to act, nor does he create the fruits of action. All of this is enacted by the modes of material nature. So before, last verse, we heard about us, the jiva. Now we're hearing about the modes of material nature. And Prabhupada writes towards the end of the purport, it is ignorance acquired from time immemorial that is the cause of bodily suffering and distress. The ignorance causes. As soon as a living entity becomes aloof from the activities of the body, that doesn't mean we don't think, we use our body, we take care of our health, but we just understand that this body is meant for Krishna's service. He becomes free from the reactions as well. As long as he is in the city of the body, the soul, he appears to be the master of it, but actually he is neither its proprietor nor controller of its actions and reactions. He is simply in the midst of the material ocean, struggling for the existence. The waves of the ocean are tossing him and he has no control over them. His best solution is to get out of the water by transcendental Krishna consciousness. That alone will save him from all turmoil. So the soul, the living entity within the body, in one sense, does nothing. Krishna, in the Sanskrit in this verse, right, he says, na 3 times. Na kartritvam, na karmani, na karma phalu samyogam. So the soul does not create activities, doesn't get other people to act in a way. This happens by the modes of material nature. That's what this verse is saying. But then who controls the modes of material nature? Well, that's Krishna, it's the super soul. So often though, after we understand how great Krishna is, then people wrongly say, and this is really important because I'm sure you heard this sometimes, and it's kind of connected a little bit with that question about Gopal Chandra Prabhu who passed away. People wrongly conclude that the responsibility for all actions and all reactions is Krishna's fault. Right? We might think because Krishna as a super soul is the doer, he has to be responsible for my sinful actions. Why then should I receive karma for what has been caused by Krishna? So Krishna wants to remove that consciousness from us. And therefore, he says, verse 15, Nandate kasyachit papam nachayava sukritam vibhuhu agyanena vritam jnanam tena muyanti jantavaha. Nor does the Supreme assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. Well, I'm not taking on your karma. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of ignorance which covers their real knowledge. And so what does the soul do? Prabhupada explains this in the purport about 2/3 the way down the first paragraph. Desire is the subtle form of conditioning for the living entity. The Lord fulfills his desire as he deserves. Man proposes and God disposes. The individual is not therefore omnipotent in fulfilling his desires. The Lord, however, can fulfill all desires, and the Lord, being neutral to everyone, does not interfere with the desires of the minute, independent living entity. So someone who's not devoted to God in one way or another, they are on their own. Krishna is neutral to them. But, however, when one desires Krishna, the Lord takes special care and encourages one to desire in such a way that one can attain him and be eternally happy. So this is our challenge, to really want Krishna. Obviously, we want Krishna because many of you have taken initiation and every day chanting 16 rounds. But how intensely is that fire burning? How deep is our prayer to Krishna? Do we really chant, Trinada Pisini Chena, Torora Pisishna, Amani Namana Dena, Kirtanisa, Ainanda Tanuja Kinkaram Patita Mam Vishame Bhavam Budho. Right? Lord Chaitanya is showing us how to pray with incredible sincerity. Incredible sincerity. It's like, we're in a well and the rope of bhakti is being lowered, and we're kind of hanging on to it a little bit, maybe with this pinky or with a few fingers or maybe one hand, or sometimes we're holding on tightly, but other times it's just like, right? But really we need to wrap that rope around our body 10 times and hold on to it so that Krishna can really pull us out of the well. So, and then towards the beginning part of the last paragraph, therefore, the embodied soul, by his immemorial desire to avoid Krishna consciousness. So since time immemorial, we've been avoiding Krishna. So we cause our own bewilderment. It's our fault. So even though Krishna, we'll talk about this more, but it's ultimately our fault because it's our desire. But we get into our little world and we get so caught up in it. Right? So here in this verse, I'm just trying to think where I should start here. There's so much to talk about in one sense. Well, let's give an example. If trying to understand the doers, and we may have already given this example before, but we'll do it one more time. So if we are, there's a small boy and he tries to lift some big weight that he just saw his father lift. So the boy first, he desires to lift the weight and he tries and he tries and he can't possibly do it. But his father sees his son's desire to lift it and he stands behind him and he lifts it up. So you could say, well, the father actually lifted the weight. You could say that. But the father would not have lifted the weight unless he hadn't seen his son trying to. Right? So you can't say father is the only person who lifted the weight. It was also the desire of the son. So similarly, we desire, and then Krishna fulfills our desires if we deserve it. I mean, you might say, well, I desire 500 crore rupees. Well, you also have to deserve it according to, karma in previous life. So this, and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives a nice, he said, if if the living entity that is not an important doer, the main doer, we could even say in one sense, although Krishna, why would the Shastra say do this and don't do that? Right? If we weren't the doer, it's telling us you should do this, you shouldn't eat too much, you should do this, you should, what do we say? Only eat prasadam, you should only go to places where Krishna is involved, you should only hear about Krishna, right? Those instructions are there. If we're not the doer, then we're just going to sit here and wait. Okay, well, I'm going to wait for prasadam to come my way because, right? That doesn't work that way. Okay, one more verse and then we'll talk, then we'll, Gyanena is 16. Tu tad agyanam yesham nasitam atmanha tesham aditya vajgyanam prakash yati tat param. When, however, one is enlightened with knowledge by which nescience is destroyed, nescience means ignorance, then his knowledge reveals everything as the sun lights up everything in the daytime. And there's a beautiful sentence in the middle here that the living entity is bewildered in so many ways. For instance, when he unceremoniously thinks himself God, he actually falls into the last snare of nescience. So that was my meditation today, also walking around New York. I mean, maybe there's some people who are very God conscious, but most of these people are just totally think that they're their body, totally absorbed in this one lifetime, this short one lifetime, totally absorbed in thinking that they are New Yorkers, that they're male, that they're female, that they're this, that they're that, totally absorbed. And therefore totally in Maya. So another way to analyze how knowledge leads to this, ultimately to Krishna consciousness. There are these three doers. Living entity is doer number one, right? And if we have knowledge, and we realize that our bodily activities are automatically carried out by the modes of material nature, that can be really good, right, for the doer number one. And therefore the modes are doer number two. But the modes only carry out activities desired by us and sanctioned by Krishna. Therefore, Krishna as super soul is doer number three. Okay. So questions, comments on this? On who's the doer? Well, you think about questions for a second. I'm just going to go to get a drink in the kitchen here because these devotees who I'm staying with, they don't use air conditioning, so it's actually pretty hot here. So think about it. If you have any questions, I'll be back in a second. Okay, any questions or comments? Here's one in the chat. Though there are three doers, why punishment in individual soul only? I think all the three, including Paramama, should have been punished. Krishna is he's only fulfilling our desire. So, of course, the modes of material nature, they are inert matter, so they can't be punished. But remember, Murari Madhava Prabhu, the punishment, the karma is also there to help us become, to realize that this is not a place of happiness and to wake us up. So karma is not senseless. It is there to ultimately help us. But we are given our free will. And it is, Krishna's just gives that to us, and then we decide how to use it. But Krishna, as we heard earlier, he's all good. Why would you punish someone who only does good? He never does anything but good. He can't do anything bad, so how can you punish him? Right? And the modes of material nature are inert matter. So the only one that, is going to get some karma is us. I hope that helps. Other questions, comments? Okay.
Prabhu.
Yes.
So I think the way to look at this one is morning when we get up, we get up to ensure that we get up in the mood that we want to wake up Krishna. We want to pray to him so that he can do his leelas during the day time. That is a mode of devotee, whereas the non-devotee, the mood is more like it is mentioned in the Shastra, so I'm just doing that.
Well, that would be a good non-devotee. At least they're following some Shastra.
Yeah, but it is just for the means it is just as a karma kanda kind of situation. So that's the difference between a devotee having a bhakti in our life versus
that's right.
Just following the scripture for the sake of following it.
Right. So there's three types of people, right? There's the devotee. There's a person, you say, that they're following the scriptures, but not for spiritual advancement, but just to live a good life, right? And then there's others who just say, to heck with Shastra.
Yeah, right? Correct.
Yeah. And I think when I first moved to India in the 1980s, there was a lot more in category number 2. Correct. But I think category number 3 is filling up more and more now. I think. Depends on which part of India maybe, but just like forget about the Shastra.
Yeah.
Let's just party. Was that your impression also, Prabhu?
Yeah, that is correct. That is what we experience most of the time.
Yeah. I also can remember, especially, still you see some people, but when I was there in the 80s, especially elderly people, they had been through partition, right? And all the problems with that. And they may not be devotees, but they're very dutiful.
Yes.
Very, very dutiful.
Very dutiful.
I do this, and very kind of sattvic dutiful. I do this, bus. And you see that less and less, I think, now.
Yeah.
But I remember that was 40 years ago. Yeah, I remember seeing that. I remember thinking, oh, they're following the Gita. Maybe not the highest teaching of the Gita. Highest teaching is bhakti. And some of them, they can become bhaktas very easily that way.
Right.
Just add Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu. Anything else?
Thank you, Prabhu.
No? Okay. Now we're going, the next section is about focusing on Krishna as a super soul. And this is from 17 to 26. So, a beautiful verse. I love this verse. Many years ago, when I was a brahmachari, I remember memorizing this verse. Tad budayas, tad atmanas, tad nishtas, tad paraya janaha. Gachant yapunar avritim, jnana nirdutta kalmasaha. When one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge are all fixed in the Supreme, then one becomes fully cleansed of misgivings through complete knowledge and thus proceeds straight on the path of liberation. So this verse says that after, after we achieve knowledge that we're different from our body, right? That comes from the mode of goodness. Then to achieve liberation, we have to become fixed in the Supreme. So the next step, okay? And what about, so then the next question could be, what about, this idea of impartiality or neutrality for those who act on this level? So then one of the most famous verses in the Gita, Vidya Vinaya Sampane Brahmane Kavihastini Suni Chaiva Swapakecha Pandita Samadharshina. The humble sages, by virtue of true knowledge, see with equal vision a learned and gentle brahmana, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog eater. And Prabhupada, listen to what he says in the beginning of the purport. A Krishna conscious person does not make any distinction between species or castes. The Brahmana and the outcast may be different from the social point of view, or a dog, a cow, and an elephant may be different from a point of view of a species. But these differences of body are meaningless from the viewpoint of a learned transcendentalist. So very powerful words here. So true knowledge, Krishna now is explaining, is not just the difference between the matter and spirit, body and soul, but now also knowledge of the super soul that is in everyone's heart. And so that a learned person sees that super soul who's impartially sanctioning everyone's activities and desires. So that is quite a, something to work on, right? Something to work on, to see everyone equally. That doesn't mean we treat everyone equally. I mean, we could treat everyone with respect in the sense that they have Krishna in their heart, right? Even Hitler, right? Or Stalin or Donald Trump or whatever, right? They all have Krishna in their hearts. And they are ultimately a lover of Krishna. That's actually a fact. But we deal with people differently. For example, a person who's interested in Krishna consciousness, or a person who tells us that we're all in Maya, we're going to deal with those people externally differently. But even the person who tells us we're in Maya, we can respect that they are a soul, ultimately a lover of Krishna, even though it's very covered over now. And what to speak of, like, for example, Lord Chaitanya said, if you go into the forest and you loudly chant, you're benefiting all the non-moving entities, all the blades of grass, all the trees. They're all getting benefit by hearing you chant. Because, the example is we see, a dog and a tiger the same, but we would not embrace the tiger just because he has Krishna in his heart. So there's the practical, just like ultimately, we might be a man in this life, and we may be a woman in the next life, or the women on this call may be men in the next life, or they may all be back with Krishna in the spiritual world. But so we're not ultimately the gender that we have for this one lifetime, right? We're transcendental to that gender. But that doesn't mean, like, if you're in the airport, that you can just choose any bathroom to use. You're still in this world. You still have to act practically, right? And so there's the philosophical and the practical. So text 19. Ihaiva tayar jita sargo yesham samye stitam manaha nirdosham hi samam brahma tasmad brahmani te stitaha. Those whose minds are established in sameness and equanimity have already conquered the condition of birth and death. They are flawless like Brahman, and they are already situated in Brahman. So then Prabhupada writes a little bit about the super soul and the purport. The Lord is flawless because he is without attraction or hatred. Similarly, when a living entity is without attraction or hatred, he also becomes flawless and eligible to enter into the spiritual sky. So without material attraction, without material hatred. But again, if someone's trying to attack the deities or something terrible like that, we definitely need to do whatever it takes to stop them from doing that, right? And if someone is really taking an interest in Krishna consciousness, we're attracted to spend time with them. So this is attraction and repulsion on the material platform, but spiritually, we also like that. So let me continue. And then I'll take na prarishyat priyam prapta no dvijet prapta cha priyam stira buddhir asammodho brahmavid brahmanistita. A person who neither rejoices upon achieving something pleasant, well, yeah, great, nor laments upon obtaining something unpleasant, who is self-intelligent, who is unbewildered, and who knows the science of God, is always situated in transcendence. So again, this is more super soul realization, because we do become elated when something good in Krishna consciousness comes about, right? Someone donates a big plot of land right in the center of a city. We like, Hari Bol, right? Or we do lament, like when Gopal Chandra Prabhu passed away. We no longer have his association, right? But it's on the spiritual level, not on the mundane level. So I just wanted to make that, clear, because otherwise, wait, I thought we'd do all these things. So, but a practicing devotee, a sadhaka, we should try to act in this way immaterially. Prabhupada explains in his purport that such behavior is really a symptom of a siddha, not just a sadhaka. That person does not identify with the transformations of the mind. Oh, I don't like, I'm angry with this person, I like that person. It's all transformations of the subtle body. And he realizes that his happiness and distress do not therefore bring him happiness and distress. Does that make sense? In other words, the ups and downs of life, he or she doesn't identify with them in that same way. So I'll read one more and then we'll see if you have any questions. Text 21. Now he continues to describe the symptoms of a person who's fixed on the super soul. Bhaya sparshesh vashaktama vin yatmani yat sukam sabbrahma yoga yuktatma sukam akshayam asnute. Such a liberated person is not attracted to material sense pleasures, but is always in trance, enjoying the pleasure within. In this way, the self-realized person enjoys unlimited happiness, for he concentrates on the Supreme. So we use our intelligence to reject sense gratification and instead seek pleasure in Krishna. So to the degree we can replace sensuality with spirituality, that gives us some measure of our success. And Prabhupada explains this in the purport. The highest pleasure in terms of matter is sex pleasure. The whole world is moving under its spell, and a materialist cannot work at all without this motivation. But a person engaged in Krishna consciousness can work with greater vigor without sex pleasure, which he avoids. That is the test in spiritual realization. Spiritual realization and sex pleasure go ill together. So any questions, comments on this last set of verses?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Yes.
In 18th verse, in purport, it has been mentioned that the Brahmana body and the other person, dog-eater body, are same, but they are different in equal in quantity, but quality-wise they are different.
Right. Although it says, although the body of a Brahmana and that of an outcast are not the same. Yes, go ahead.
Can you just describe how exactly, what is the distinction they are trying to make here?
Well, I don't, I mean, like the devotees who live in this apartment that I'm staying, they are Pakka Brahmins. This place is so clean. You could eat off the floor. No problem. I'm afraid to breathe here because they're in Italy. I'm here, and I'm afraid I'm going to spend like 2 hours before I leave cleaning it because it's so clean when I got here. They are and Kaustuba Prabhu is a real Brahmana, and then I walk out on this. I'm just right next to Central Park, and then there's some person sleeping on a park bench. He hasn't bathed in 3 days, and he's never washed his clothes in the last 6 months or something like that. So there's a big difference in terms of quality of life, but they both are spirit souls, right? And they both ultimately are Krishna's eternal servants, even though they're very, very different. Does that help?
Yeah, but my question is whether they are trying to distinguish in terms of about material feature, or they are trying to distinguish here on spiritual features of this one, or both?
Well, we're trying to not distinguish. We're trying to say that the Pandita, the Pandit, sees the human being, the Brahmin, the outcast, the dog, the elephant, the dog eater, understands that the super soul is in all of them. Okay, so the super soul is in all of them. And like I said, I tried to say earlier, that doesn't necessarily mean that we treat everyone exactly the same, because we do also deal with their external like we don't embrace a tiger, but we might embrace another Vaishnava. Simple example. So spiritually equal, materially different.
Okay, spiritual.
And Varnashram tries to be the link between the two, right? Varnashram acknowledges the differences, but Daivi Varnashram at least, but with the goal ultimately of transcending that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And also the goal of just having a nice shanti society where everyone knows what they're supposed to do, what Brahmins do, what Vaishyas do, what Brahmacharis do, what the Grihasthas do, what Vanaprasthas do.
Okay.
Like that.
Okay.
But it's tricky in this day and age, right?
Yeah.
If you just want to be, Brahmins, if you were a good Brahmana, you never had to worry anything about money, right? People will give you can do some madhukari, people will give you, but these days, some Brahmins that they might starve if they didn't make some practical arrangement for it. Because the culture is not to give donations to the Brahmins.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that all right, Prabhu?
Yes. Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Okay, anything else? So, we are on 21 or 22. Which one did we just finish?
21.
We're on 21 now.
No, 22. Prabhu.
Acha, we finished 21. Yeah. Okay, very good. We might finish this chapter maybe. Let's take a 5-minute break, okay? 5 minutes, and let's see. Yeah, just 5 minutes from now. Don't go too far. Recording in progress. All right, so we are another very important verse. Hopefully we can really engrave this into our consciousness. Yehi sangsparsa jabhoga dukkha yonaya evate adi antavata konteya nate shu ramate buddha. An intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery, which are due to contact with the material senses. O son of Kunti, such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them. And Prabhupada writes the very first sentence, material sense pleasures are due to contact with the material senses, which are all temporary, because the body itself is temporary. The liberated soul It's not interested in anything which is temporary. That's quite a sentence. Huh? A liberated soul is not interested in anything which is temporary. So that doesn't, again, that doesn't mean that we don't brush our teeth, we don't take care of our health, but we do it all in connection with bhakti. So we really need to, make our intelligence strong. Sense gratification equals misery. Sense gratification equals misery. Sense gratification equals misery. And we need to combine that philosophical understanding with a higher taste, with, the param drisva that we heard in chapter 2, verse 59, a higher taste of Krishna consciousness, the nectar of kirtan, the nectar of hearing shastra, the nectar of japa, the nectar of prasadam, the nectar of deity worship. And the results, if we can tolerate the sense desires, not succumb to them, then the results are explained in the next verse. Saknoti hoiva ya sodham prak sharira vimokshanat kama krodho bhavam vegam sa yukta sa sukhi naraha. Before giving up this present body, if one is able to tolerate the urges of the material senses and check the force of desire and anger, he is well situated and is happy in this world. So what this verse is saying, it's a little scary. Is like, how long do we have to tolerate the urges and pushings of the mind and senses? Does Maya ever give up? Do we just one day wake up and Ram Ram Hari Bol? Right? This verse says that we must tolerate up to the time of death. But we can remain tolerant by fixing our consciousness on Krishna. Because, like we said, the pleasure of Krishna consciousness combined with this philosophical understanding can easily help us tolerate the pushings of the mind and senses. And this pleasure of spiritual realization, that's the topic of verse 24. Yonta sukon tar aramas tatan tar jyotir evaha sayogi brahma nirvanam brahma bhuto tigachati. One whose happiness is within, who is active and rejoices within, and whose aim is inward, is actually the perfect mystic. He is liberated in the Supreme, and ultimately he attains the Supreme. Prabhupada writes, unless we are able to relish happiness from within, how can one retire from external engagements meant for deriving superficial happiness? So he really is urgent to get a higher taste. And now Krishna is going to give us in text 25, more symptoms of the person who's getting satisfaction from matter and from spirit instead of matter. Labhante Brahma Nirvanam Rishaya Shina Kalmasa China Dvaidha Itatmanam Sarva Bhuta Piterataha. Those who are beyond the dualities that arise from doubts, whose minds are engaged within, who are always busy working for the welfare of all living beings, and are free from all sins, achieve liberation in the Supreme. Purport. First part. Only a person who is fully in Krishna consciousness can be said to be engaged in the welfare work for all living entities. When a person is actually in knowledge that Krishna is the fountainhead of everything, then when he acts in that spirit, he acts for everyone. The sufferings of humanity are due to forgetfulness of Krishna as the supreme enjoyer, the supreme proprietor, and the supreme friend. Therefore, to act to revive this consciousness within the entire human society is the highest welfare work. And yeah, so because one, we could get a little discouraged right after, if we read these, verses 24 and 25, and it sounds like, achieving liberation is really difficult. And, Prabhupada uses the word in translation, ultimately, like, oh, it's far away. So therefore, Krishna gives us a little mercy in 26. Kama krodho vimuktanam yatinam yatachetasam abhito brahma nirvanam partate vinditatmana. Those who are free from anger and all material desires, who are self-realized, self-disciplined, and constantly endeavoring for perfection, are assured of liberation in the Supreme in the very near future. Yay, very near future. So the question might be, how is it possible something so difficult, because it sounds so difficult, right? Free from anger, all material desires, self-discipline, constantly endeavoring for perfection. How can that be achieved in the very near future? Well, that's Krishna. That's Krishna's kindness. Yeah, that's Krishna's kindness. So, any questions up to now? Comments?
Prabhuji, in translation for verse 23, why the
23.
translation? 23, yes, Prabhu. Before giving up this present body,
Right.
that means, Prabhu, even when a person is near his death, he is in the deathbed, at that time also giving up this. This is the one can, tolerate the urges. He has to, at the time of death, one will not be able to have any, material desires, no Prabhu. What kind of material desire a person have at the time of death? So my get a doubt, why before giving up the present body, should it not be much earlier also? Before giving up means.
Yes, it could be 150 years before giving up the present body. When I was able to, or yes, but the idea that we should, sometimes some religions, it's kind of like a post-dated check. You know what a post-dated check is?
Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah, right. So they give you a post-dated check that you're going to keep suffering in this world, but the next life will be wonderful, right? But Krishna doesn't say that. Krishna's actually, Prabhupada writes in one place that the spiritual world and bhakti in this world are identical. So we don't need to wait till we die to then go to heaven and enjoy, but we can be absorbed in good consciousness now, way before giving up this present body, and be situated and happy in this world. So in one sense, you could say before giving up this present body is also like setting a goal. Now, of course, one of the tricky things is we don't know when we're going to die. We could die tomorrow, or we could die in many, many years from now. Prabhupada would say that Parikshit Maharaj was very lucky because he was given 7 days and he knew, but we don't know. We don't know if it's 7 minutes or, 7 years or whatever. We don't know. So therefore we should get serious now. In one place, Prabhupada says that one should get very serious if they were born into a Vaishnava family, then from birth, or from understanding the urgency. So the challenge is, Prabhuji, and I know maybe you and I are around the same age. I'm not sure. But every day we wake up and it seems like it's just like the day before. And then the next day is just like that day. But one day, it's not going to be like that.
Yes.
And all of us are running, but we're going to end up against a brick wall called death. But I don't know. Somebody could calculate if I'm 63 years old and you multiply that by 365 days. It just seems that every day you just wake up and you're still fine. But one day it's not going to be like that. Is that all right, Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhuji. Yeah, true.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Okay, now we only have 3 verses. We're actually going to finish this chapter even with time to spare. Wow. Okay, so the next 2 verses is telling us how we can also realize the super soul through the practice of Ashtanga yoga. So really, these next 2 verses are like coming attractions to the next chapter, chapter 6, which is about Ashtanga yoga or Dhyana yoga. So let's see. Let me go back to okay. Sparshan kritva bahir bhayams chakshus chavantare ruvo pranapanao samao kritva nasab yantara charinao yatendriya manobudhir munir moksha parayanaha virgatechcha bhaya krodho yasada mukta eva saha. Shutting out all external sense objects, keeping the eyes and vision concentrated between the 2 eyebrows, suspending the inward and outer breaths within the nostrils, and thus controlling the mind, senses, and intelligence, the transcendentalist aiming at liberation becomes free from desire, fear, and anger. One who is always in this state is certainly liberated. And in the 2nd paragraph at the beginning, Prabhupada writes that after explaining the above principles of liberation in the Supreme, which is what we covered today, the Lord gives instructions to Arjuna as to how one can come to that position by the practice of the mysticism or yoga known as Ashtanga yoga, which is divisible into an 8-fold procedure called yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. In the 6th chapter, the subject of yoga is explicitly detailed. And at the end of the 5th, it is only preliminarily explained. So it's just like giving us a little heads up about what's coming next. Okay, so after this brief preview of chapter 6, Krishna ends the chapter by telling Arjuna how he can be peaceful even on a battlefield. And this is definitely one of the most famous verses in the Bhagavad Gita. Bhoktaram yogatapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram suridam sarvabhutanam gyatva mam shantim richati. A person in full consciousness of me, knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, the supreme lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, attains peace from the pangs of material miseries. So Krishna is summarizing many topics that have been discussed already in the Gita, and he puts them in the context of achieving liberation. So Bhoktaram Yaga and Sarva Loka Maheshwaram, that refers to Krishna and not the demigods as the final enjoyer of all sacrifices, whether it's Karma Kanda or Karma Yoga. And then Bhoktaram Tapasam, that refers to the Krishna as the goal of the Gyanis who are doing austerities. And then there's the Suridham Sarva Bhutanam, and that's kind of directed towards the yogis who meditate on the super soul, because the super soul, is the well-wishing friend of all living entities. So, knowing Krishna's position in relation to karma kanda or karma yoga and jnana and super soul realization, it helps us come to the understand and appreciate and come to the liberated platform. And then I'll read some of the purport. So at the end of the first paragraph, unless one understands these bare facts, it is not possible to achieve peace in the world, either individually or collectively. That's a pretty strong statement, right? President Biden right now is just finishing his trip to the Middle East, where he's trying to bring peace. And there's efforts to try to bring peace between Russia and Ukraine. And Sri Lanka is in total mess right now, right? With the resignation, the demanded resignation, I think, of the prime minister or the president. And here it says that this is the way to achieve peace. To understand that God is we are meant to do activities for his pleasure, that everything belongs to him, and that he is our best friend. And Prabhupada says, this is the essence of Krishna consciousness. Lord Krishna is the supreme predominator, and all living entities, including the great demigods, are his subordinates. One can attain perfect peace only in complete Krishna consciousness. So then the last paragraph, we'll read the whole paragraph and then see if you have any questions. This 5th chapter is a practical explanation of Krishna consciousness, generally known as karma yoga. The question of mental speculation as to how karma yoga can give liberation is answered herewith. To work in Krishna consciousness is to work with the complete knowledge of the Lord as the predominator. Such work is not different from transcendental knowledge. Direct Krishna consciousness is bhakti yoga, and jnana yoga is a path leading to bhakti. Krishna consciousness means to work in full knowledge of one's relationship with the Supreme Absolute, and the perfection of this consciousness is full knowledge of Krishna or the Supreme Personality. A pure soul is the eternal servant of God as his fragmental part and parcel. He comes into contact with Maya due to the desire to lord it over Maya, and that is the cause of his many sufferings. As long as he is in contact with matter, he has to execute work in terms of material necessities. Krishna consciousness, however, brings one into the spiritual life, even when one is within the jurisdiction of matter. So we're still in this body, but we can be elevated to spiritual life, for it is an arousing of spiritual existence by practice, sadhana, in the material world. The more one is advanced, the more he is freed from the clutches of matter. The Lord is not partial toward anyone. He's equal to everyone, right? We read about that. Everything depends on one's practical performance of duties in Krishna consciousness, which in every respect helps one control the senses and conquer the influence of desire and anger. So picking up those beads, offering our prasadam, reading the Bhagavatam, everything depends on practical performance of duties. And one who stands fast in Krishna consciousness, controlling the above-mentioned passions, remains factually in the transcendental stage or Brahman Nirvana. The Eightfold Yoga mysticism, which we're going to hear about in the next chapter, is automatically practiced in Krishna consciousness because the ultimate purpose is served. Okay, I'll finish it, I guess. There is a gradual process of elevation in the practice of yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. But these only preface perfection by devotional service, which alone can award peace to the human being. It is the highest perfection of life. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So, any questions, comments? Okay. Well, then, let's see. We how many verses did we cover today? We did 22 verses, right? So actually, some of these purports are very short. So if you can, please read and do the homework assignments up to verse 32. I know that's a lot of verses. We may not cover all 32, but that's the first section is 4 verses. The next section is another 4 verses or 5 verses, and then 10 to 32. So read up to verse 32 and do the homework assignments. Any last points? Okay, well then I wish you a very pleasant week in Krishna consciousness, and we will see you next week, Krishna willing. Okay, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Dandavat pranam. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Dandavat.
Hare Krishna.
Pranam,
Hare
Prabhuji.
Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandavat pranam.
Haribol, Haribol, Haribol.